makes our organization, Disha, a channel for discourses on social justice. Today's speaker is a leader in the discussions around sustainability and inclusivity in development. He is Special Advisor to United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to that, he has advised both UN Secretary Generals Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan on the Millennium Development Goals. World-renowned professor in economics, leader in sustainable development, and best-selling author, our speaker is seasoned at wearing multiple hats. I had the fortune to work with him last summer and felt that TC community must get that opportunity to pick his brains on SDG 4. So please help me give a warm TC welcome to Dr. Jeffrey Sachs.
Thanks a lot. It's nice to have a chance to spend a little bit of nice, intimate discussion time with you. The SDGs got started January 1 after 3 years of negotiation. They were adopted on September 25th last year. And I'm excited by them because I think we can really make something of them. You know, the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals is to follow the Millennium Development Goals with an expanded global agenda. The MDGs for 15 years helped to put some measure of attention of the world on the extreme poor, which is not so easy to achieve because most of the time the extreme poor are out of sight, out of mind of the rest of the world, even in their own countries, even in our own country. This is a common phenomenon. And the MDGs were helpful, not decisive, but helpful in directing attention and resources towards the problems of fighting poverty. Around 2012, the UN member states saw that maybe that opportunity of setting global goals and drawing attention to big global challenges could be applied on an even broader set of issues. Yes, to continue the fight against extreme poverty, but to expand it to include the big challenges of sustainable development, which in the UN jargon means the challenge of combining the economic goals with social justice and with environmental sustainability. So the Sustainable Development Goals are trying to draw the world's attention and energies and resources towards the triple bottom line: economic development, social inclusion, and environmental challenges, including climate change and preserving ecosystems that are under tremendous threat. I think it's remarkable, actually, that in this very divided and often conflictual and very confused world, where things often don't make too much sense, the 193 member states of the UN had a very organized, coherent, sensible 3-year process to identify the goals that would encompass these 3 broad objectives of society: the economic, social, and environmental objectives. At the beginning, they took a kind of straw poll of the ambassadors and representatives of the governments. What should the goals be? And the initial list had something like 250 goals on them. And over time, they began to realize that's a lot. We need to get the numbers down. I kept arguing for 10 maximum. Kept saying 2 tablets, you know, we had 10 commandments for a while. Moses negotiated them down to 10, I suppose. And why don't you try to keep it at that level? But they got them down to 17, and then they said, okay, we've done it. So we ended up with 3.5 tablets of 17 goals, and but good ones, smart ones. And I do suspect and expect that you know all of them. And if not, just brush up, because everybody at TC ought to know all of them. Then you should make sure your professors, your colleagues, your mothers, fathers, siblings, and so forth know them as well. Because part of the idea of attention span is to press the attention of these. But I like them a lot. I'm very gratified that SDG number 1 calls for ending extreme poverty by 2030. Everything's bound for 15 years, so that's time-bound, bold, quantified. Not so easy, but not impossible. That's basically the standard on all of them. SDG 2 is around hunger and sustainable agriculture. SDG 3 is another favorite of mine, universal health coverage. And SDG 4 is your baby, universal quality education from pre-K through secondary, through some kind of skills, whether through at secondary or vocational school or tertiary education. For everybody, universal, by 2030. And really, and that's the job. Just to round out quickly, SDG 5 is about gender equality. SDG 6 is about access to safe water and sanitation. SDG 7 about access to modern energy services. SDG 8 is kind of the economic development goal, growth, industrialization, and decent jobs. SDG 9 is sustainable infrastructure. SDG 10 is to reduce inequalities within and across countries. SDG 11 is sustainable cities, so now we're getting into the environmental home stretch. SDG 12 is what's called the circular economy, sustainable consumption and production, recycling, closing the waste cycle, preventing toxic releases, and so forth. SDG 13 is the climate change SDG. And what they put in that was what we agree in Paris in a few weeks. And in Paris in December, there was a very good agreement reached. And now that's incorporated into SDG 13. SDG 14 is for conservation of marine ecosystems, oceans, and other marine ecosystems. SDG 15 is about terrestrial ecosystems, so stopping the destruction of rainforests, protecting biodiversity in terrestrial ecosystems. SDG 16 is called Peaceful and Inclusive Societies. So it's addressing violence against women and children, it's addressing mass incarceration, it's reduced homicides, rule of law. And SDG 17, finally, to round it out, is about the commitments for global partnership, including development assistance. So, those could have been rejuggled to 10, by the way, easily, but they didn't want that, so we have 17, and I think it's a good, robust set of objectives, and they're stretch goals, they're not easy. And we have 2 or 3 years of a project like this to make these goals real. Because if 2 or 3 years goes by and nothing's happening, then it just becomes kind of, well, that was a boring UN naive thing and it will be forgotten. Whereas if, like the Millennium Development Goals, it gains some life, then one can make progress. Or if, even better than the Millennium Development Goals, it becomes seen as this is really important for us, then it can be transformative. And of course, that's what I think we really need to aim for. I don't view this as a nice thing to do. I view this as, are you kidding? We're not going to do that. We're going to not solve the climate change problem. We're going to destroy biodiversity. We're going to leave our children without an education. I don't think so. This is something that obviously every society needs to do. And one big difference of these goals and the Millennium Development Goals is this is not about rich countries doing something for poor countries. It's about everybody achieving these goals. And the US is in a mess, by the way. And so the SDGs really apply to the United States too, like they do to basically every country I know. In the US, for example, the US is very rich, but incredibly unequal, obviously. This street is kind of a dividing line, in fact, between poverty north and wealth south, not strictly 1/20th, but we have the richest census zone in the Upper East Side, just abutting about the poorest in East Harlem, just north of roughly 100th Street on the east side. And that's the shocking part of America, which is extreme wealth, unbelievable, next to extreme poverty. And of course, we have huge environmental crises in this country, ranging from the fact that we've neglected climate change for a generation, and we have the Republican Party in complete lying, disgusting, corrupt denial because they take money from oil companies, and so they completely lie about this issue. And to the fact that we have, as everybody knows, a major city in my home state of Michigan, Flint, Michigan, which is poisoning its kids with water that is as dangerous as can be, that is lead pollution. And that's America. So you can imagine these problems are essentially universal. There's only one little corner of the world that is almost there, and that's Scandinavia, naturally. So Sweden, Denmark, Norway, pretty close. But even those countries have work to do, for example, in lowering the carbon content of their energy systems so that they're part of the climate change solution. So, we have to figure out a way to actually work on these goals, and that requires coherent strategies and expertise. And I want you to tell me how to solve SDG 4, because the only way I ever figured out anything good was with someone that really knew said, here's what to do, Professor Sachs. And 15 years ago, I had great advice from malariologists and from AIDS doctors about how to address MDG 6, which was controlling malaria, AIDS, and other communicable diseases. And the experts actually had some fabulous ideas. And a lot of progress was made over the last 15 years. So here's my challenge to you. You're told, here we are, April 26, 2016. By December 31, 2030, in every country there has to be universal secondary completion with a quality education. And that means also in countries where the completion rate right now at secondary level is 20% or 30%, or for girls maybe 10%. What do we do? And I can tell you what some experts said to me is, oh, that's impossible. Can't we just say lower secondary? And I said, I just looked at it. It doesn't say lower secondary, it says secondary. Oh, come on, Jeff, let's just call it lower secondary. I said, no, that's actually from inside UNESCO. You know, that's too hard. I don't want to hear in April 2016 that a 2030 goal is too hard. That's too lazy from my point of view. What I want to hear is, how can this be done? How in a 15-year period could there be a mega scaling up of education? And you'll tell me rightly, God, do you know how long it takes to train good teachers, and we've got to build a lot of buildings, and there's these are remote areas, and this is very difficult, and so forth. And I want to parse it out into two different pieces. One is, what should we do? and how to do it using every good idea and trick that you have. And I suspect, maybe more than you, but I don't know, I like information technology, so I want to maximize the use of technology just because it's our newest, tool that we have, and I believe we can make something big work on that. But I want to know what to do, how to do it, and then I'll help you worry about the money problem, the cost problem. But I want to separate two things. What are the investments that should be made? What's the strategy that should be followed? What are good examples of rapid scaling up of education systems? Are there some really great examples of that? How was it done? What are the tricks? What should we do? What should we study? What should we look at? What should we try? And then I'm working very hard, and I really am working hard, on trying to add many billions of dollars of new funds per year for the poor countries so that it's not a resource constraint for them. That's probably not the main issue for the United States, is the flow of money. It's more all of the neighborhood problems, the environment problems, the unfairness of our society, and so on. Though money's to the schools is part of that, money to the homes is another part of that, because the places where poor kids do well also have a lot of family support, not just support for schools. But for the low-income countries, I'm convinced that if you come and tell me this is really the way for Ghana or Chad or Laos, PDR, or Bolivia to really have a big scale up, we need to find more resources. So I'm every day with a vacuum cleaner of money, trying to actually find out who will put money in, and I'm on my way to Europe tomorrow to talk to several donor countries for this, and trying to emphasize how can we raise new funds. China, Korea, the Gulf countries, of course, Scandinavia. I'm going to France next Tuesday because they're ready to put in, I don't know how much more. I said, how about €1 billion more per year into global education? They said, that may be a little bit high, but I'm going to go press the point. But they're ready to put in at least hundreds of millions of dollars more. Okay, that's what I want to say. What's the answer? Thank you very much. So I've asked my question. Who's going to give an answer?
Maybe I'll ask the question here, and maybe look at an answer too. So one of the ways that when we were working on SDG 4, was to look at blended learning to be able to be a way to scale training of workforce. Looking at teachers, mass scale of educating teachers through online resources where they're looking at maybe a course online, and then looking at schools as the new classroom where they're implementing while they're learning.
Yeah.
This was something that we worked on, but my question about SDG 4 is that with social issues, with war, with conflict zones, are we trying to address the right challenge, looking at SDG 4 to be the problem where there are many socio-political reasons because of which this may not work?
Yeah.
How is it that we address that simultaneously is also maybe a way to look at that.
If you're in a war zone, then SDG 4 is not your main problem. Your main problem is a war. And certainly, if these wars continue to rage, there's no IT strategy that's going to make serious schools work. This is really a problem of war. And of course, we need to be clear about that. And in general, specifically on conflict, because it is true that tens of millions of kids are implicated in conflict zones and end up in disaster. That's a major global issue. It's not specifically an SDG issue. It's actually, to a large extent, a geopolitical issue, even more than a local conflict issue. The war in Syria is really a proxy war. It's not even a war among Syrian belligerents as much as it is Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, the United States, Turkey, all viewing Syria as their interest zone and maybe sphere of influence. I don't want to go into geopolitics on this, but I would say that that's a really deep problem. But it's not the kind of problem that TC and the Earth Institute can solve in the methods we know. Of course, I badgered the Security Council on that also, but I think that really is a geopolitical issue, and a real one, and it could be a devastating barrier to all good things. I'm not a hawk, and I don't believe we can solve these problems through military means, by the way.
It's on mute. Just press the button.
Hello, Professor. It is my great honor to meet you. I was actually, I used to work in UNESCO before, and then I was attending the World Education Forum last year, so
Great.
I saw you at that time, like far away. Now I see you very closely, so it's my great honor to meet you. Actually, your question is...
Where are you from?
I'm from Korea.
You are, good. Okay. So Korea is at the top of the charts.
Yeah.
So you've got to give the answer. How come?
Actually, that's my concern. I mean, concern and question for me every day, because that's the reason that I came to TC right now. And it's a very, very, very difficult question. Just to share my little bit of knowledge that I learned until now, I'm here to utilize the ICT in education. That's I think the fastest way that we can solve the problem and achieve the SDG goals. For example, the work that we are currently thinking of doing is we're thinking of collaborating with TC and other organizations as well. And we're thinking of using the EMI system. Have you heard about Education Management Information System? So that is education data collection system that every country has implemented. And we, UNESCO have open in a system which can be distributed to public as well. So we're trying to use the system and try to see how many students are at risk. So we want to estimate students at risk and provide some interventions to something like a prescriptions that we can give some examples and appropriate interventions to them. And the second thing that we can do is it is kind of utilizing ICT platforms. So we make an intelligent tutoring system, so we can give some tutoring system to the remote areas as well. So this is kind of applied to China and all the big countries, I think, where I think USA as well. And USA just started, so we don't have many resources on this. We don't have many researchers on this as well. So that's why TC is trying to raise a lot of researchers on this area. So we can make some intelligent tutoring system, adaptive learning system in the remote area, and then provide online teachers to them, and then provide any examples. So the only problem is fundraising.
Yeah. So I think that this is my also sense that IT is a platform. So many things can be done on it. In the health area, we use the IT platform for community health workers, of course for electronic medical records, for telemedicine, for distance training, for consultation. And we haven't even started using it for patient monitoring, for example, because now patients in the US can maybe send in their blood pressure daily. You can have all sorts of expert monitoring systems that are basically IT monitoring. And for education, you would think how many uses for IT in education? Data collection, information systems in general, online curriculum, distance training with teachers in remote areas. Distance classrooms or connected classrooms. E-tutoring, like you say, of course, online libraries for kids who don't have a book, but could in principle have 50,000 books, local language materials that could be developed for kids that right now don't have any local language materials. So I see the platform idea as really key. Every school connected, and then keep adding applications and using also this system to collect data, to collect feedback, to do testing, to build curriculum and so forth. And what I'm trying to do in Ghana is to have that platform for the health sector. But maybe what we should try to do is find 2 or 3 or 4 countries that would be ready to have a comprehensive e-platform for education, where a lot of these applications could be tried. And my guess is that if there's a coherent approach, that if UNESCO is part of it, and TC is part of it, and it involves lots of innovative things, we'll find the financing for that. So I think that that really is the way to do it. I heard just recently that the Gates Foundation is about to get much more engaged on the education side. I've been saying for the last 3 years, I'm still looking for my Bill Gates of education, because he invested in healthcare. Maybe the Bill Gates of education is Bill Gates, which also would be nice. But I've had my eye on Carlos Slim, who is, if not the first richest person in the world, the second. And so he's got funds too. So I think that if these innovative ideas can be developed, and even on a tiny pilot started, that the scaling up at least to meaningful scale can be accomplished. Now, back to Korea just for one moment. So Korea, you know, on PISA scores, on the standardized scores, is just at the top of the world. And it's also, of course, very interesting that all of the East Asian countries are near the top. So there's something really good going on there. And the kids are learning a lot. They're learning numeracy, literacy, science. And while sometimes it's complained, well, it's rote learning or it's not creative and so forth, by the way, it's learning a lot, and it's learning things that are really important for skills, because Korea could never have achieved the economic miracle that it did without this superb educational performance. It's really important. My guess as an outsider is that the Confucian spirit of respect for the teacher and respect for education has played a very big role in this. And the teacher is held in a very, very high esteem. I think the most wonderful thing in the world is to be a professor visiting Japan, China, or Korea, because the esteem is very, very high. And so it's really a lot of fun, just huge respect. And I think inculcating that is really part of also SDG 4, that it's not just the money, but it's actually also the idea that what could be more important in your country than good education, and helping parents to understand that while maybe in the past their child would become a farmer and would take the farmstead next to them, and that education wasn't really so central for that. In the 21st century economy, there's no way forward without the education. And I think that there's a great sensitivity to that, but for Korea also to help share how to hold a teacher in high esteem. What does it mean? What is the way that the government has helped to bring that about, is really shared teaching that I think is very, very important. So one of the things I'm trying to do is to help get started a global fund for education that would fund this. And I keep saying to the Korean leaders, come on, this should be yours, jump to the occasion. And Secretary General Ban Ki-moon always says he grew up in extreme poverty in Korea, and it was only the miracle of a quality Korean education that allowed him to have this incredible life chance that he had. So I think that this is a message that I'm trying also constantly to convey to the Korean leadership as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned at the beginning like being very important, but I can't think
Like something? Awesome. So you mentioned earlier that it's important just to find each of the SDGs very important. And we were just discussing kind of like different cultural values for education. So I guess I want to ask you, like, what do you believe are the largest barriers, specifically in America, for having people have these values, understanding that the SDGs are important and knowing what they are and really feeling them, not just in their mind, but in their hearts?
Yeah. I think probably more Americans than we think have that. I think America's better than its politics, actually. And I mean that in a quite literal sense, that if you look at public attitudes, they're more decent than the outcomes of the political process. The political process is very corrupt right now and really dominated by money. And the money is often not very pleasant money. So I see the power of the lobbies, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, the oil industry, the private health insurance industry. These have had a really big effect on American politics of distorting our politics. And also the wealthy campaign contributors have successfully kept their taxes low for the last 30 years and drained the government revenues of resources. That's part of the story. There's another part of the story which is a more traditional two aspects of America. One is America has less social cohesion than other countries. Of course, the racial issues in America have gone from the very first days of settlements in America to today without proper resolution, and it's been a disaster. And America also has had an ethos, unlike Scandinavian countries, for example, that America, I often say, America is the place where you don't have to like your neighbor. You're not even encouraged necessarily. You just leave me alone. I don't want to pay taxes. You do what you want, and that's enough of it. I don't think that's good enough for a society. I think that it leads to really a coarseness and a harshness that we're suffering from right now. So one of the things that I think is important for us is to understand that we could do better and to try to understand why we're not doing so well in this country. One thing is clear and quite interesting and stark. In the opinion surveys, when Americans are asked, is the country on the right track? Overwhelming majority say no right now. There really is a lot of unhappiness. It's not kind of bluster, everything's great. This is a mess. And I think that that's actually the opening to potential solutions. It's not a lot of self-confidence right now. It's not a lot of self-satisfaction. It's actually, my God, what's going wrong here? Of course, it's leading to many possible outcomes because crises don't necessarily just lead to reform. They can lead to even more crises. And I think that that's a real problem. I'll make a political statement, which I shouldn't, but I will anyway. You know, I support Bernie Sanders, and I like him, what he's saying, and I just can't help but say that the fact that he has this tremendous outpouring of young people is really a great sign, because the young people, first of all, are the future of the politics. And second, they're really gravitating to a message that I think is a message about social fairness and justice and really the sustainable development concepts very much. So I see hope in that as well. So I think we have, of course, a social challenge in America that's quite significant, but we also have a political challenge. And one last thing that I've noticed is that I barely go to Washington these days. I used to go a lot more because I find Washington so boringly useless that I don't like to spend my time there. You know, okay, I know nothing's going to happen and time is scarce, but when I go to city governments, I see a lot of interest because at the city level, across America, people want to solve problems. Why don't we get more jobs here? How do we improve the schools? And that can be blue state, red state. At the city level, there's really action. So one of the things that I'm hoping for is that the SDGs get city level traction. And we're working on a cities initiative around the country right now that is picking up some steam actually. And I had a wonderful opportunity about a month ago at the UN where the Bahamas actually sponsored a meeting, and it was mostly African American ministers of large congregations. And they came from all over the United States, and I talked about these Sustainable Development Goals. They didn't know anything about them really. That's another part of America, is you don't hear about this stuff very much. But they said, God, that's perfect for our congregations, perfect for our communities. And so I think that kind of grassroots approach can really reach across the United States. And that's part of what I hope we can do in the next few years.
Okay, thank you for coming. And what you said about pizza and Paris translating, because I'm actually from Shanghai, China.
Yeah.
And I see
Number one.
Yeah, number one since I first participated in 2009, and the results are going to come out in a few months. I'm very excited. And speaking of
Korea number one as a country, but Shanghai number one, period.
And one part about SDG 4 is about quality education. My question is, do you see international or regional assessments such as PISA and TIMSS becoming, say, valid and important mechanism to track educational development?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of PISA. You could probably give me 100 reasons why not or yes, but I like it a lot. And a lot of poor countries are very afraid of it, obviously, because they'll come out very low. But that's okay. I hate looking at the scale some days also. So you don't like to be measured necessarily, but I think it's actually important that we have a unified global testing standard and that countries hold themselves accountable to that. And poor countries will start out very, very low, but they'll be able to watch progress. And they also won't be able to kid themselves that it's working. They'll have an idea that this is really a challenge and try to figure out what to do. So PISA covers about 75 countries right now. And I talked to Andreas Schleicher, who's at OECD, the head of PISA, and want to work with him to expand that basically to universal coverage. And that will take some years, but I really think it's a good thing to do and quite important.
Hello, Professor Sachs. Thank you for being here with us. I'm from India. We have quite a few young people struggling with the issue of education.
Yeah.
I don't actually study education. I study organizational psychology here at DC. And I wanted to bring in that perspective from what I'm learning at DC.
Great.
From what it appears from your speech, money is not the biggest issue in tackling this SDG. Technology as a tool is available, and there are advancements and people are studying. And my perspective is, and slash question, is what about the people and the talent that will actually be the driving force behind changing things in education? So what are the initiatives that you think need to be taken? Like, who's going to dedicate next 20 years of their life to say, I want to make SDG 4 happen? Because I think that's the key, right? And well,
we have to say
yes, but tomorrow you get a call from Snapchat and it's paying you double, maybe not, right? The point is that there is of course people driven by passion and purpose, but there needs to be systems that support them to be able to make an impact.
Yeah.
So it's more on those lines, what can be done is a question for me and is a question for you. And a sub point below that is how do we mobilize them? Because the problem is different in different regions.
Absolutely.
So if it says 50% of out of school kids is in sub-Saharan region, well, then we need to send people there. So how do we do that? How do we mobilize talent around this? I don't know. But just to bring in that talent perspective.
Great. Well, one thing we should do is make sure that there's a network of teachers' colleges around the world talking about these issues together. I don't know if such a network easily exists, but there are teachers' colleges just about everywhere. And why don't you guys organize a global virtual conference of teachers' colleges so that within 6 months we have a 2-day online real-time workshop on SDG 4. And I love the idea of virtual conferences, by the way, because you don't have to go to the airport, you don't have to go through a baggage check, you mobilize local talent, you don't, and it's can be done at very low cost. So if you could help get something going like that, count me in, and we'll do that. Time zones are a bit of a problem, but not a devastating problem. I've done every Tuesday morning for the last 5 years a global classroom that starts at 8 a.m. in the morning here and 8 p.m. in Beijing, and then everything in between. And what you miss is Australia and the west coast of the United States. For that, you need a second session. But you can get basically from New York through Europe, Africa, and Asia onto a 12-hour. Of course, that gives you maybe a couple of hours to work with on the Asian side, or if you do it 8 a.m. in Asia, it's 8 p.m. here, and so it gives a couple of hours here. But I think the idea of more virtual conferencing on this would be terrific. And if you can figure out how to do that, count me in to give you any help on that. If it's a small amount of funds that are needed to help pull that off, we can manage that also. But I think part of the answer is we need to mobilize locally all over the place. And there are people all over the place whose life's work it is to become an educator. And there are people who should take on this challenge all over the place. Sometimes one great example can be inspiring in a wider range. I was very much involved for 15 years in public health scale-up because the MDGs focused a lot more on health than on education. I never quite understood why. It wasn't I was promoting the health scale-up, and it was working to the extent of many billions of dollars more coming in, and new organizations like the Global Fund, Gavi for immunizations, PEPFAR for AIDS treatment, and many new programs. Education, not so much actually. Maybe it's more complicated. There is a global partnership for education, but it's dismally underfunded. UNESCO is very badly underfunded. The World Bank doesn't have much. It's surprising. What's so central for our future is really chronically underinvested. But it's changeable also. India is doing some really there's fascinating experiments going on. IT going on, the Aadhaar unique identification platform, which is made by Nanda Nilekani and others, is phenomenal work. I'm trying to bring that to Africa right now, and I think we'll actually have a project, India-Africa project, to extend the unique ID effort. But my view is let's get moving and figure out what to do. And I know that there are many interesting experiments going on. I don't know Bridges International, which is New York-based, but it's working on very low-cost IT-empowered efforts in Kibera, Nairobi, for example. I'm interested to learn more on that. I'm interested to find great examples. 15 years ago, I went to see Paul Farmer's work in Haiti. Probably most or all of you know about Paul Farmer. And he was treating about 30 AIDS patients at the time. He was, by the way, finding by hook or by crook the medicines that he needed, including, I think, pilfering some medicines from Mass General or from the Brigham in Boston and so on, but basically he was finding ways to keep his patients alive. For me, it was a huge eye-opener. He brought me 15 years ago to see the Haiti sites. And I said at the time, because I'm a macroeconomist, not a public health specialist, I said, okay, let's scale this up. And it was part of that. I remember sitting down with Kofi Annan a couple of weeks afterwards, and I said, Secretary General, I want to tell you what I saw. It's really possible to treat AIDS patients even in a place as poor as Haiti, and I saw them back up on their feet. It's incredible. And those were discussions that played a role in getting the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria going. So what are your innovations that you want to push, or what are great examples, or even to say this project, which is working in this state in India, is doing amazing things. That example can become a fulcrum for a massive effort. And we just have to find those, or test them, or push these success stories and create really a movement for a massive scale up. And I keep emphasizing to all the governments, you've got 15 years, oh no, 14 years, 8 months. Time is flying. Let's get moving. And I was on the phone today with Gordon Brown, who is chairing a major task force on education financing. He's terrific. The Norwegian government is supporting that. They'll make recommendations. I hope and I believe and I keep urging very strong recommendations for this scaling up. So we have to create